The ballroom glittered with light. Crystal chandeliers spilled their brilliance across polished floors, scattering reflections over the crowd of friends and relatives who swayed to the rhythm of the string quartet. Glasses clinked, laughter rose in waves, and the smell of roast salmon and champagne drifted like a promise of celebration. I sat at my table near the stage, watching my daughter, Claire, quarrel in her ivory dress. At 42, she looked radiant, almost girlish again, her auburn hair pinned back with pearl combs that caught the light whenever she leaned into her new husband-to-be, Victor Hayes. She glowed in a way that both warmed and unsettled me, because in the midst of the music, the joy, and the endless toasts, I saw my grandson, Ethan, weaving through the crowd. He moved with the intentness of someone carrying a secret too heavy for his 15-year-old shoulders. His face, pale under the amber lights, found mine across the room, and when he reached my table, he bent down quickly, his breath sharp against my ear. "Grandpa," he whispered, his voice trembling, "you have to stop this wedding. Now." The words pierced through the din like a church bell at midnight. I turned to him, startled. "Ethan, what do you mean?" His eyes, so much like his mother's when she was young, brimmed with something I had rarely seen in him, raw fear. "Victor isn't who he says he is. Please, Grandpa, you have to believe me. If they finish this ceremony, it'll be too late." A chill slid down my spine. My gaze shifted instinctively to the head table, where Victor sat with his arm draped possessively around Claire's shoulders. He was laughing at something one of his friends said, his polished watch glinting as if it were mocking me. Claire leaned into him, her smile too wide, too rehearsed, the same smile she'd worn as a teenager when she wanted to convince me nothing was wrong. I clasped Ethan's shoulder, forcing calm into my voice. "Tell me exactly what you know." But before he could answer, the band swelled louder, drowning out his words. Victor rose to his feet, raising his champagne glass. His dark eyes scanned the room, landing briefly on me, as if daring me to challenge him. Ethan stepped back, anxiety tightening his jaw. "Not here," he mouthed. My stomach clenched, because this wasn't the first time I'd felt the gnawing wrongness of Victor Hayes. It had been 6 months earlier when I first met him. Claire had invited me to dinner at her apartment in downtown Seattle. I'd expected the usual, her warm hug, Ethan's quick chatter about school, the familiar comfort of her little two-bedroom that overlooked the Sound. Instead, I stepped into an atmosphere that felt occupied. Victor was already sitting in my usual chair by the window, legs spread wide as if he owned the view. He didn't rise when I entered. His eyes flicked over me once, then dismissed me, as though he were cataloging an antique at a pawn shop. "So," he said, his arm tightening around Claire's waist, "you're Samuel, exactly like Claire described. Old school, suburban, set in your ways." I extended my hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Victor." He ignored it, turning instead to admire the room. "These furnishings are dated, sweetheart," he said to Claire, tapping the arm of her sofa. "Once we're married, we'll upgrade all this." Claire flushed, smoothing her dress. "Dad, come sit. Dinner's almost ready." But my grandson, Ethan, broke the silence. He looked up from his homework spread across the counter. "That's Grandpa's chair," he said softly. Victor gave a short laugh, sharp as glass. "Well, families change. People need to get used to new arrangements." The words landed heavier than they should have. Through the window, Seattle's skyline glittered against the February night, but inside, the apartment felt shrunken, stripped of its warmth. During dinner, Victor monopolized the conversation, speaking vaguely about his consulting business, never offering specifics. Every attempt Claire made to talk about Ethan's achievements, his science fair win, his piano recital. Victor waved aside. "The boy needs structure," he declared, not even looking at Ethan. "Discipline builds men, not coddling." Claire's knuckles tightened around her glass. Ethan dropped his gaze to his plate. I tried to interject. "Ethan's a good kid. Bright. Thoughtful." Victor's smile was thin. "Of course you'd think so. Grandfathers always wear rose-colored glasses." By the time dessert was served, I had cataloged enough red flags to choke a horse. But Claire looked at Victor with a softness I hadn't seen in her since before her divorce. And that, perhaps, was what frightened me most. The next morning, Claire had shown up at my house, still in her wrinkled work clothes. Her eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, but her voice carried steel. "Dad, you hated him," she accused, standing in my kitchen doorway. "I saw it on your face the moment you walked in." "Claire," I said gently, setting down my mug, "there's something about Victor that doesn't sit right with me." Her pacing grew sharper, her voice louder. "You always do this. You ruined things with Jason, too, remember? You made me doubt him until everything fell apart. Jason cheated on you, Claire," I reminded her. Her voice cracked. "At least he wasn't the monster you made him out to be. Victor is different. He loves me. He makes me feel wanted again." The sunlight through the window caught the tears trembling on her lashes. My daughter, brilliant, strong Claire, looked like a woman clinging to a lifeline, blind to the fact that the rope was fraying. I reached for her arm. "Please, just think." She pulled away. "No, I've made my choice. Victor asked me to marry him. I said yes. You can either support me, or you can stay out of my life." The door slammed, leaving the house shaking with her ultimatum. A week later, my phone buzzed with a text. "Ethan, Grandpa, can we talk? Something's off about Victor." Those words planted a seed of dread that only grew. Now, months later, at the wedding, that dread had taken root. Ethan's whisper was no childish paranoia. It was confirmation. And as I looked around at the guests raising glasses, at my daughter's glowing face, at Victor's triumphant smile, I realized something chilling. The celebration was a facade. The real story, the danger, was just beginning. The night of the wedding rehearsal, I couldn't sleep. My old house in Ballard creaked with the winter wind. The radiators hissed like angry serpents, and yet the louder noise was in my mind. Claire's ultimatum, Victor's smirk, Ethan's terrified whisper. I sat at the kitchen table, the lamplight spilling over yellowed newspapers and the photographs I'd pulled from a drawer. Claire at 10 years old with a missing tooth, grinning in front of her first bike. Claire on her college graduation day. Ethan barely a toddler balanced on her hip. Claire the day she divorced Jason, hollow-eyed but proud. I remembered Jason, the man who'd seemed steady, dependable. An accountant, pressed shirts, steady handshake. I had trusted him at first. And then, like rot creeping into the beams of a house, his darkness revealed itself. The late nights, the possessiveness, the young paralegal with the yellow hair. When I tried to warn Claire then, she had accused me of meddling, of jealousy. And though I'd been right, my daughter had never forgiven me for it. She had equated my truth with destruction. Now, with Victor, history was circling back, but with higher stakes. This wasn't a failed marriage waiting to happen. Ethan's whisper suggested something darker, something dangerous. 2 days before the wedding, Ethan came to see me. He looked older than his years, shadows under his eyes, his hoodie zipped to his chin. "I didn't want to text this," he said, perching nervously on the edge of my couch. "But I think Mom's in real danger." My chest tightened. "What did you see, Ethan?" He hesitated, then pulled out his phone. On the screen was a photo, a blurry shot he'd taken from behind a cracked door. Victor stood in the living room, phone pressed to his ear, voice raised. You tell them the money will be wired after the papers are signed. Don't contact me again before then, Victor had said. Ethan's hand trembled as he replayed the recording he'd secretly made. My blood chilled. It wasn't proof, not yet, but it was smoke. And where there was smoke, there was usually fire. Why didn't you tell your mom? I asked. He swallowed hard. She doesn't listen. Every time I bring up Victor, she says I'm being disrespectful. She thinks I don't want her to be happy. But Grandpa, he scares me. The way he looks at me, like I'm in the way. And the calls, they happen late at night, when he thinks I'm asleep. I leaned forward, gripping his shoulder. You did the right thing coming to me. But we need to be smart. If Victor's involved in something illegal, confronting him without proof will only push your mom further into his arms. Ethan's voice cracked. But if we wait, it might be too late. At the rehearsal dinner, I watched Victor more closely than ever. He charmed the room effortlessly, telling stories about his supposed business ventures in Portland, about luxury clients, about high-value contracts. He had the polish of a man who'd practiced his lines in the mirror, but I saw the cracks. The way his hand tightened on Claire's wrist when she interrupted. The way his smile faltered whenever Ethan spoke. The way he dismissed anyone who questioned his vague anecdotes. When I asked about his family, his eyes hardened. They're private people, not relevant here, he said flatly, before steering the conversation back to himself. Later, while guests mingled over dessert, I slipped outside for air. The streets of downtown Seattle glistened with rain, neon lights reflecting in the puddles. I lit a cigarette, my first in years, just for something to do with my hands. That's when I saw Victor through the window, standing alone at the bar, phone pressed to his ear again. His expression was no longer the jovial host. It was hard, calculating, predatory. And I knew, in that moment, Ethan's fear wasn't adolescent paranoia. It was instinct. The kind of instinct that saves a deer from a wolf. Claire came to see me again the next morning. She was radiant, dressed in white silk for final fittings, her hair swept back in soft curls. But there was something brittle in her voice. "Dad, I need you to promise me something," she said, standing in my living room like she had as a child asking for ice cream. "I need you to walk me down that aisle tomorrow without causing a scene." I stared at her. "Claire." "No, listen." Her eyes flashed with desperation. "I know you don't like Victor. I know you think he's different, but I love him, and I can't go through another wedding with you second-guessing me. Not after Jason. Not again." Her words cut deep. "I don't want to lose you," I whispered. "Then support me," she said firmly, "or stay out of my life." It was the same ultimatum as before, but colder now, sharpened by exhaustion. And as she turned to leave, her perfume lingering like a ghost, I realized my daughter was slipping beyond my reach. That night, Ethan called me. His voice was urgent. "Grandpa, I found something." He explained that he'd checked Victor's briefcase when Victor was in the shower. Inside were papers, contracts written in legal jargon he didn't understand, but one name kept repeating: Hayes Global Strategies, and a bank slip listing transfers in the hundreds of thousands. Where would Victor get that kind of money? Ethan asked. I didn't know, but my gut told me it wasn't legitimate. I told Ethan to bring what he found tomorrow, to keep it hidden, and to stay close to me during the wedding. As I hung up, I stared out my window at the Puget Sound, dark and endless under the night sky. Seagulls wheeled over the water, their cries sharp and mournful. Tomorrow, something was going to happen. I could feel it in my bones, the same way I'd felt storms coming when I was a boy on my grandfather's farm, and I prayed I'd be strong enough to face it. The church smelled of lilies and polished wood. Guests filed in, their chatter echoing off vaulted ceilings. Claire looked radiant as ever, her veil catching the morning light like spun sugar. Victor stood at the altar, immaculate in his tailored suit, every inch the groom, but his eyes, dark, restless, flicked constantly toward the doors. Ethan tugged my sleeve as we waited to walk Claire down the aisle. His whisper was urgent. "Grandpa, we can't let this happen." His hand pressed something into mine. A folded paper, a copy of one of the contracts he'd photographed with his phone. I glanced at it, my pulse quickening. The name of an offshore bank glared up at me like a warning. The organ swelled. The guests rose. It was time. Claire looped her arm through mine, her eyes shining. "Ready, Dad." I forced a smile, but inside my heart thundered, because I knew, before the vows were spoken, before the rings were exchanged, the truth was going to crash through this ceremony like lightning. And Victor Hayes would not walk away untouched. The air in the church was heavy, like a storm waiting to break. The organ's notes soared, bright and ceremonial, but to me they sounded like the countdown of a clock. Every step Claire and I took down the aisle felt weighted, echoing louder than they should. She smiled at the guests, her face glowing with joy, her hand gripping my arm with trust. She had no idea, but Ethan knew. I could see him at the front pew, his face pale, his fists tight on his lap. His eyes flicked between me and Victor, silently pleading. Victor stood at the altar, broad shoulders squared, suit gleaming. His smile stretched wide, charming to anyone who didn't know better. But I saw the twitch at his jaw, the restless flick of his gaze toward the entrance, like he was waiting for something or someone. When we reached him, he extended his hand. His grip was firm, almost bruising. "Thank you, Samuel," he said smoothly, his eyes locking on mine, "for entrusting your daughter to me." My throat tightened. The words I wanted to say, the warning, the accusations, pressed hard against the back of my teeth. But one look at Claire's shining face held me still. "Not yet," I told myself. "Wait." The minister's voice rose, calm and measured, speaking of love, of unity, of sacred bonds. Claire's eyes shone with tears, her lips trembling with anticipation. Victor spoke his vows with perfect cadence, his voice deep and practiced. Every line a performance for the audience. Promises of devotion, of protection, of lifelong loyalty. He sounded like the very picture of a man in love. But I had heard his other voice, cold, sharp, calculating, on Ethan's recording. The contrast made my stomach twist. Then it was Claire's turn. Her voice wavered as she promised to love and honor, to trust, to stand by him through all storms. And she meant every word. That was the tragedy. Ethan shifted suddenly, pulling something from his pocket. My heart lurched. He wasn't going to wait. "Stop." Ethan's voice cracked through the silence like a gunshot. Gasps rippled through the pews. Claire froze mid-vow,
her bouquet trembling in her hands. "Ethan," she hissed, horrified. "Sit down." But Ethan's voice grew stronger, steadier. "Mom, you can't marry him. He's lying to you. He's not who he says he is." The room erupted in whispers, heads turning, guests exchanging shocked glances. Victor's mask slipped for the first time. His smile faltered, his eyes flashing with fury.
He stepped forward, towering over Ethan. "This is not the time, boy," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. Ethan didn't flinch. He held up his phone, his hand shaking, but his gaze unwavering. I recorded him, talking about wiring money, talking to people he didn't want you to know about. A hush fell over the church. Claire's face drained of color. "Ethan," she whispered, "what are you saying?" Victor's voice rose, sharp with anger. "He's a child, Claire, jealous, twisting things he doesn't understand." But Ethan pressed on, louder now, emboldened. I found his contracts. Offshore banks. Fake companies. He's using you, Mom. He doesn't love you. He's planning something. Gasps filled the room again. The minister stepped back, clutching his Bible like a shield. I moved closer to Ethan, my body angled protectively between him and Victor. He's telling the truth, I said firmly, my voice carrying through the stunned silence. Claire turned on me, her face stricken. Dad, how could you? Not today. Not like this. Her words broke me, but I couldn't stop. Claire, I said, softer now, desperate. I wanted to wait until after, but Ethan's right. Victor is not the man you think he is. He's hiding things. Dangerous things. Victor's mask shattered completely then. His smile vanished, replaced by raw rage. He grabbed Claire's wrist, pulling her toward him. We're leaving, he snapped. That was the final mistake, because in that brutal gesture, the entire room saw the truth. The control, the violence lurking beneath the charm. Claire gasped, trying to pull free. Victor, you're hurting me. Gasps turned into shouts. Guests rose from their seats. And then, like fate had been waiting for its cue, the church doors burst open. 2 uniformed officers stormed in, followed by a plainclothes detective flashing a badge. The detective's voice rang out, authoritative and unyielding. Victor Hayes, you're under arrest for wire fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement. The room exploded into chaos. Claire stumbled back as Victor's grip was torn away. He fought, shouting curses, his perfect suit wrinkling under the officer's hands. This is a mistake. I'll have your badges, he roared, but his voice cracked under the weight of the handcuffs clicking shut. Claire stood frozen, tears streaming silently down her face, her veil trembling. Ethan rushed to her side, wrapping his arms around her. She clutched him desperately, sobbing into his shoulder. I stood rooted, watching as Victor was dragged down the aisle he had expected to triumphantly walk out of as a husband. Instead, he was hauled away in chains, his mask shattered for all to see. The church emptied slowly, guests murmuring in disbelief, some comforting Claire, others leaving in stunned silence. I found myself outside in the cold, leaning against the stone steps, my hands trembling. For the first time in years, I lit a cigarette, the smoke sharp in my lungs. Ethan sat beside me, pale but steady, his hand still gripping mine like an anchor. You were brave, I told him quietly. You saved her. He shook his head. We both did. I looked at him then. Really looked, not just as my grandson, but as a young man carrying more weight than he should have at 15. His courage humbled me. Claire emerged finally, her face streaked with tears, her gown rumpled, her eyes red. She looked broken, but there was clarity in her gaze now. She walked toward us slowly, her steps hesitant. Dad, she whispered, her voice raw. Ethan, I didn't see. I didn't want to see. I opened my arms, and she collapsed into them. Ethan pressed between us. For the first time in years, we held each other not in celebration, not in conflict, but in survival. Weeks passed. The headlines filled with Victor's name, his crimes, his fraudulent companies, the millions he had siphoned through unsuspecting clients. He faced trial, his empire collapsing piece by piece. Claire returned to work slowly, her pride wounded but her spirit not entirely broken. Therapy helped her begin to untangle the mess Victor had woven into her life. Ethan grew quieter, more thoughtful, but also stronger. The boy who had once been shy and overlooked had faced down a predator and protected the people he loved. And me? I found myself sitting at the kitchen table many nights, listening to the quiet hum of the house, and realizing something profound. Families break, fracture, heal, and break again. But sometimes, through fire and betrayal, They forged themselves into something stronger. One evening, Claire came over with Ethan. She cooked dinner, salmon, roasted potatoes, green beans, and we ate together, laughter slowly finding its way back into the cracks. Afterward, as Ethan dozed on the couch, Claire looked at me across the table. "Thank you," she said simply. Her eyes shone with gratitude, but also with a sadness I knew would linger. I reached across and took her hand. "We'll be okay," I said. "We always find our way back." And for the first time in months, I believed it. Because in the end, love isn't about perfect weddings or flawless choices. It's about standing together when the masks fall away, when the truth burns everything down. And as I looked at my daughter and grandson, survivors, fighters, family, I knew we would weather whatever storms came next.